Welcome to Ship Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fortin, and we're here for the 14th and penultimate episode in a 15-part series as we journey room by room through The Shining by Stephen King. This is episode 14 over chapters 52 through 58, pages 600 through 659, the final part of the read-along series. So, what happened in these chapters? 52 is titled Wendy and Jack. Jack is killing Wendy. Wendy gets away, locks herself in the room, but Jack, with the hammer thingy, busts in while Wendy is trying to figure out where Danny is. Jack is distracted by the approaching sound of Halloran. Chapter 53, Halloran laid low. Still being accosted by hedge animals, Halloran gets the bright idea to set himself on fire. Partially, at least, and it works as the hedge animal goes up in flames and Halloran reaches the Overlook Hotel and enters. Jack attack. Right in the face with the hammer thingy. And Jack then catches the elevator to the third floor. Chapter 54, titled Tony, Danny is indeed on the third floor. And he is conversing with Tony to try and survive. He is impeded by apparitions that distract him, which he is able to dispel by claiming they are false face, until Jack shows up. Chapter 55, That Which Was Forgotten. Wendy wakes up. She finds Halloran and wakes him up. Then, hearing Jack rampaging 2 stories above them, attempts to win Mother of the Year when Halloran says, "We've got to go help the little guy," and she says, "No, fuck him. He's got this." I'm not sure where that turn of events came from, but we will get into that a little bit later. Jack is... Where am I? Oh, yeah. Danny tells Jack about the boiler. And in 56, titled The Explosion, that which had been Jack, we can't say Jack necessarily any longer, I don't think. That which had been Jack flees to the boiler room. Danny then joins Wendy and Halloran, and those 3 emerge from the hotel just in time to not be exploded. Chapter 57, titled Exit, Exploded happens. Halloran goes to the equipment shed to find blankets so they don't freeze, and the hotel, while he is in the equipment shed, attempts to turn him as well. We see a lot of power coming through the equipment shed. It is interesting. It would be interesting to maybe see a little bit more of what is behind that, but we don't get it because Chapter 58, the final chapter of the book, is titled Epilogue/Summer, where Wendy and Danny are visiting Halloran at one of his new haunts, one of his new jobs. And good old Al has a job lined up for Wendy in Maryland. So what are we talking about with this series of chapters? The first thing that I have to point out is the return of a good old friend. No, not Al. But on the top of 644, we get from Halloran the phrase, "I guess we do." The return of Guess. The return of Guess, the guest of the Overlook Hotel. Moving on from that, just a couple small observations that sort of, if I can steal the words of John Jones, tickled my pickle. 638, be mindful of when this novel was written. "It's too late," he said. His eyes stared at them with a desperate kind of madness. He looked at Dick, and suddenly Halloran's mind was fixed with an image of a clock under a glass dome. The clock in the ballroom that had been donated by a Swiss diplomat in 1949. The hands of the clock were standing at a minute to midnight. This sounds a lot like the Doomsday Clock, doesn't it? What does that midnight mean? It means nothing. It cannot mean anything unarbitrarily in the story itself, because that boiler is not set to blow at midnight. It's set to blow when it simply can't take the heat anymore. So that picture of the clock at 1 minute to midnight, unmask at midnight. So we're going metaphors deep into destruction here. Moving on when we're whilst talking about metaphors, on page 656, we get this interesting little tidbit while Danny and Wendy are visiting Halloran at his new workplace. Danny is down by a lake, a body of water, and he's fishing. And Halloran says, you know, you're not going to catch anything big here. You got to go out to the middle. We'll take a boat out tomorrow morning. Got to get out in the middle if you want to catch any eating fish, my boy. Out yonder is where the big ones lay. How big? Halloran shrugged. Oh, sharks, marlin, whales, that sort of thing. There aren't any whales. No blue whales, no, of course not. These ones here run to no more than 80 feet. Pink whales. How could they get here from the ocean? Halloran put a hand on the boy's reddish gold hair and rumpled it. They swim upstream, my boy. That's how. With the image that has been presented to us of the Overlook Hotel being in the middle of nothingness, we are forced to reconcile that idea of going out into the middle of the lake to catch the big fish with the fact that this is possibly a metaphor for the Overlook Hotel. You have to go out into isolation to catch the big ones. You have to go out into isolation. Jack thought that going out into the isolation would help him catch the big one of his story, of his play, finishing that big idea. But not all big ideas are good ideas. Not all big ideas help you get to good places. And if we are to accept the ghosts and haunting of the Overlook Hotel as representations for ideas / those wasps, remember? Those things which haunt us as individuals. It is often in isolation that they really, really take a turn on us. So I thought that was an interesting little metaphor right at the end of the book there. On 603, while we're talking about things being repurposed, if not reimagined as they are, during the fight with Jack, now remember, this is a fight between a husband and wife. It doesn't need to be insane person and hostage wife. Break it down to the real world concepts at play here. This is a fight between a married couple. The mallet came down against the door in a volley of booming blows that made her flinch and step back. Now, obviously, that's not common in fights, but just keep in mind the concepts of what are going on here. How could he be doing that with a knife in his back? Where was he finding the strength? She wanted to shriek, "Why aren't you dead?" at the locked door. She wanted to shriek, "Why aren't you dead?" at the locked door. She did not want to scream it at Jack. She wanted to scream it at the locked door. She wanted to scream it at the fact that this is someone with whom she is living, and she has no real line of communication. Especially with the character of Jack having suffered through alcoholism. There are a lot of things there after he sobered up. The one way through which she was granted access to the interworkings of Jack was through his addiction. Sometimes that was with him being a very, very bad, mean, nasty, violent person, but sometimes it was not. We get those scenes earlier in the book of how he was human with her at first when he was getting drunk. So after kicking the habit, he becomes more of a locked door to her. How are you doing this? Why aren't you dead? All these addictions, all of this crap you're putting everyone through, why aren't you just dead? You might as well be, because you're a locked door. Where we're going here, along these lines with Wendy, one thing that I found incredibly unbelievable here happens on page 633. And I mentioned this a little bit in the So What Happened part of this episode, but this is while Wendy and Halloran are listening to rampaging Jack, knowing that there is a little boy up there, defenseless, being hounded by his father. "We got to get up there," Halloran said. "We have to help him." Her haunted eyes stared into his from her chalk-pale face. "It's too late," Wendy said. "Now he can only help himself." You're talking about a 6-year-old, 5, 6. You're talking about a first grader. You are this first grader's mother. It is nice to see that Halloran had so much more fight in him than did Wendy when it came to protecting Danny. Halloran traveled hundreds of miles, almost died in the snow, almost died from the hedge animals, almost died from a hammer thingy to the face, only to have dear old Ma tell him, "I think he's got it from here. That guy up there, possessed, did this to both of us, almost did both of us adults in. Me armed. He's got it." I don't know, was that believable to you? It wasn't quite believable to me. That was a strange turn for the Wendy character as far as I am concerned. Talking about strange turns, every once in a while in a Stephen King book, Stephen King is no fool. Stephen King has, pardon me for using a cliche, read everything under the sun. So he knows, and even if you read on writing, he knows that what you do is you write your story, and if there's anything thematically in there that you can spruce up to make it literary, you owe it to the story itself, because it is in the text. But that doesn't mean you have to bring in things from outside the text and try to prop the story up with them. That is how that's how the Charles Baxters of the world become what they are. But every once in a while in a Stephen King book, he will have something seemingly thrown in for no good reason, which is along the literary lines. And here on 620, "And now Tony stood directly in front of him, and looking at Tony was like looking into a magic mirror and seeing himself in 10 years. The eyes widely spaced and very dark, the chin firm, the mouth handsomely molded. The hair was light blonde like his mother's, and yet the stamp on his features was that of his father, as if the Daniel Anthony Torrance that would someday be was a halfling caught between father and son, a ghost of both, a fusion." This is a heavy-handed Father, Son, and Holy Ghost reference, and I'm not sure I'm not sure where that comes from. From where that comes. There doesn't seem to be, like Father, like Son is a lot in here. There's lots of ghosts going on. The idea of inheritance is going on. The idea of the better angels of our nature, and whether we can overcome the evil even if the evil is inherent to us. All of these things are in here. I'm not sure from where Father, Son, and Holy Ghost comes from. Then you kick it back with the fishing metaphor at the end there. I don't really know where you're going with that. I don't know if there is something, maybe I'm reading too far into that. Maybe it was in there and it just doesn't hit home for me. I'm not sure, but it doesn't click for me. This point here, this throwing the Christianity in there. I'm not quite sure where the metaphors are going. Moving on from that, where am I here? Oh, yeah. So 632. This is in the chapter that which was forgotten. Page 632. We are set up with something. A lot of times, So a genre reader might be looking for some setup which is story-driven when you get a title of a chapter that is that which was forgotten. Whereas a literary reader, again, I'm using air quotes for these terms because I'm not sure exactly what they are to mean and what they are to mean to whom. But a literary reader would be looking for that which was forgotten to be an emotional payoff, not a plot point payoff. So the best way to pull this off as a writer is to give one of each. And Stephen King does that on 632 and its kissing page, 633, in the chapter That Which Was Forgotten, as we are filled in that Danny is going to remember that which his father had forgotten. The first thing which was forgotten, we get this on 632, "Go on and hit me," Danny says to Jack, "but you'll never get what you want from me." The face in front of him changed. It was hard to say how. There was no melting or merging of the features. The body trembled slightly, and then the bloody hands opened like broken claws. The mallet fell from them and thumped to the rug. That was all. But suddenly his daddy was there, looking at him in mortal agony and a sorrow so great that Danny's heart flamed within his chest. The mouth drew down in a quivering bow. "Doc," Jack Torrance said, "run away. Quick. And remember how much I love you." "No," Danny said. "Oh, Danny, for God's sake, no," Danny said. He took one of his father's bloody hands and kissed it. "It's almost over." So we have Danny here reminding him of the love that comes with companionship. Again, those big ideas float around in isolation, and you're likely to get lost with one of them. One of those big whales is likely to drag you under and let the sharks feast on you. But it is Danny here remembering what Jack had forgotten on a literary level, with remembering that the love of companionship can save you from straying with those big bad ideas. And it pulls Jack back out of this possession. And he urges his son to leave, and his son refuses. Shortly thereafter, on that kissing page, oh, no. That's not right. 634 is where this other one happens. Anything else to say? It inquired, that being Jack, which had re-succumbed to his possession. "Are you sure you wouldn't like to run? A game of tag, perhaps? All we have is time, you know, an eternity of time. Or shall we end it? Might as well. After all, we're missing the party." It grinned with broken-toothed greed, and it came to him. What his father had forgotten Sudden triumph filled his face. The thing saw it and hesitated, puzzled. "The boiler," Danny screamed. "It hasn't been dumped since this morning. It's going up. It's going to explode." So there we have the plot point payoff that the genre reader will more than likely be looking for when you're talking about a chapter titled That Which Was Forgotten. One small thing that I forgot about here on 643, as they are escaping Halloran and Wendy and Danny, Halloran is cognizant of the hotel exploding behind them. Behind them, a series of 3 explosions rocked the hotel. Orange flashes lit the snow. This is through Halloran's perspective. The orange flashes also represent his shine. It is his shine that brought him back to the Overlook Hotel and ended, not and ended it, but brought him back to the Overlook Hotel for the end of it, and saving this family. The family, obviously, excluding Jack, which is another thing that is kind of strange to me. Wendy was very quick to leave a six-year-old to defend himself, and very quick to say, "Yeah, Jack's dead. Screw him." I'm going to go over this a little bit in the review next week, but it's strange to me the way that some of those things happened here. Where's my next point? Oh, my next point is something that would have been easy to simply gloss over while reading, especially as it comes so close to the end of the book. It is Halloran sitting next to the lake with Danny, and this is after Wendy has joined them. We get this little exchange between Danny and Halloran. "You won't die for a long time, will you?" This is Danny asking Halloran. Halloran replies, "I'm sure not studying on it. Are you?" "No, sir. You got a bite, Sonny." He pointed at the red and white bobber and as it ducked under, and it came up again, glistening, and then went under again. "No, sir, is the last fragment that we get from Danny over the whole, "Are you going to die anytime soon?" "No, sir, blank." So that is the big hanging question that we have here. But I think we've got something interesting to get into in the last few minutes of this when we're talking about the big themes of this novel. On 607, this is as Jack is accosting Wendy in the room with the hammer thingy. We get the little quote, "And a sound coming through the bedroom window, a motor, a high insectile buzzing sound." Remember, the snowmobiles were already described as sounding like wasps, and we know you always have to know where the wasps are. They will try to kill you. We know that from, I believe it was the last episode that we got that. Carrying forward on 637, "He's not Jack," she muttered. This is Wendy talking about Jack. "Jack's dead. This place killed him." He didn't know from where they were coming because he has been killed. On 650, now this is all within the metaphor of the things which are haunting you as an individual. Those things normally being those things most readily represented in this novel by the wasps. Something with which you have prior knowledge, prior experience, and you're attempting to pass it down to your son unwittingly. He took that wasp's nest and gave it to Danny, and it was the wasp's nest that ended up hurting Danny that night in a tangible fashion. This on 650. He circled the equipment shed and pointed the snowmobile back along their trail. The Overlook was was a torch now, flaming at the sky. This is as Wendy, Danny, and Halloran are making their escape. Great holes had been eaten into its side, and there was a red hell inside, waxing and waning. Snowmelt ran down the charred gutters in steaming waterfalls. Halloran edged through the gap between the gate and post. A moment later they were on the road, pointed back towards Sidewinder. The sound of the snowmobile's engine dwindled until it was lost in the ceaseless roar of the wind. It rattled through the denuded branches of the hedge animals with a low, beating, desolate sound. The fire waxed and waned. Some time after the sound of the snowmobile's engine had disappeared, the Overlook's roof caved in. First the west wing, then the east, and seconds later the central roof. A huge spiraling gout of sparks and flaming debris rushed up into the howling winter night. What does that sound like from previously in this novel? We'll go back to 488. Why don't they try to sting you, Daddy? He had asked. The smoke makes them drunk, Jackie. Go get my gas can. He ran to fetch it, and Daddy doused the nest with amber gasoline. Now step away, Jackie, unless you want to lose your eyebrows. He stepped away from somewhere in the voluminous folds of his white overblouse. Daddy had produced a wooden kitchen match, and he lit it with his thumbnail and flung it into the nest. There had been a white-orange explosion, almost soundless in its ferocity. Daddy had stepped away, cackling wildly, and the wasp's nest had gone up in no time. Fire, Daddy had said, turning to Jackie with a smile. Fire will kill anything. So this Overlook Hotel looks a lot like a wasp's nest as it's burning, and we even have a little wasp unit running away, the family on that snowmobile, which sounds a lot like a wasp. But we also have another memory of wasps here, and I'm going to try to get this before the camera shuts off because it's reaching its limit. This is a memory of Halloran from his childhood. He had lighted it and tossed it at the nest, a firecracker. It exploded with a loud bang, and an angry rising hum, almost a low shriek, had risen from the blasted nest. They had run away as if demons had been at their heels. In a way, Halloran supposed that demons had been, and looking back over his shoulder as he now had, he had on that day seen a large dark cloud of hornets rising from the hot air, swirling together, breaking apart, looking for whatever enemy had done this to their home, so that they, the single group intelligence, could sting it to death. All of this violence towards the wasps, what are we to make of that? What ideas are at play when we're talking about the larger metaphor of those things which haunt us and how it is that we provoke them? But that is all that I have for this episode. I hope to see you next week as we will be doing a review for Stephen King's The Shining, which is 3 good things, 3 bad things, quote, literary analysis, rating, and recommendation based on the text.